Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to our Planning Commission meeting for April 14th, 2020. And we're going to begin with some guidelines for presiding over teleconference meetings. Good evening and thank you for viewing the April 14th, 2020 meeting of the Arcata Planning Commission. As you know, the Planning Commission meeting is being held as a teleconference in response to local efforts to reduce the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Before we start, I want to thank the community for their efforts to practice social distancing. Social distancing and self-isolation is the most effective and practical way to slow the spread of the virus and increase best outcomes for our medical system. As the number of individuals testing positive for the virus increases, it becomes even more important that we adhere to strong sanitary practices of staying home, washing our hands and surfaces, and staying distant from those outside of our immediate social units. A few teleconferencing items before we start. First, and most importantly, if you are not actively speaking, please mute your microphone. The meeting will be difficult to hear if microphones are not muted except for the individual speaking. Second, deliberations and questions will be conducted by roll call. The liaison will manage deliberations. Please raise your hand electronically using the teleconference function if you would like to speak. I may call roll for last comments. Third, all votes will be taken through a roll call vote. Please answer aye, or nay when your name is called. Last, public comment is being accepted by email. The email address is pc@cityofarcata.org. PC is short for public comment. Emails are accepted for both specific agenda items and general comments. Comments on specific agenda items will be read by staff during that agenda item. The public can email additional public comments now to be read and be recorded as part of this meeting. Can we move on to a roll call, please? Director Loya, will you please do a roll call?
Absolutely. Chair Tagney?
Here.
Vice Chair Mayer?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Barstow?
Here.
Commissioner Besaid-Elcock?
Here.
And we do have two new commissioners that I'd like to introduce tonight. Commissioner Scott Davies.
Here.
And Commissioner Christian Figueroa.
Present.
Welcome all accounted for.
All right, thank you. And for oral communications, Director Loya, do we have any public comment that should be read before we start?
We've received no public comment to date.
Okay, so we're moving on to the consent calendar. And the only item on this consent calendar are our minutes from our last meeting, which was quite a while back in February. Do we have a motion or any corrections on the consent calendar?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Now, Director Loya, are you going to do a roll call via?
Yes, I will. And in the same order. Chair Tagney?
Aye, yay.
Vice Chair Mayer?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
Commissioner Barstow?
Aye.
Commissioner Besaid-Elcock? Commissioner Besaid-Elcock?
Aye.
Commissioner Davies?
Aye.
And Commissioner Figueroa? Motion passes.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to our agenda item for the evening. We have one, and it is, pardon me, as I shuffle papers, the adoption of resolution number PC 20-0 finding that the proposed capital improvement program for fiscal year 2020-21 is consistent with the Arcata general plan. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes. Good evening, Planning Commission, and welcome Scott and Christian to the Planning Commission. My name is Netra Khatri. I'm the city engineer for the city of Arcata, and as a city engineer, we have a responsibility of maintaining the CIP projects in the city. So I'm just going to start with that. As you know, we do our annual budgets, and as a part of our annual budget, we add projects to the budget. So before we approve the budget and the projects, we want to make sure the listed projects are in compliance or at least consistent with our general plan, goals, and policies. So this year, we have included or added 3 projects to the list on the CIP, and our staff went through the list and ensured that listed projects are consistent with our city policies and goals, and we want to make sure you are all in agreement with that. The listed projects are on your staff report, and also the detailed description are on attachment A as an exhibit 1. Exhibit B is a list of the projects that were approved in the past. So if you just want to make a reference to the old project, they are not all of the projects are complete. Some are complete and some are in progress. And all these 10 projects also, they will not be completed this year, but before we begin, we want to make sure they are in compliance or consistent with our general plan. So I can go over the list of the projects. I'll just describe one by one the project and what that is, with a small description of the project. And if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. I'm not sure if I could see that, but maybe Dave can wave at me and I can stop and you can ask me questions. So I'm just going to start with the list of the projects and a brief description. And before I move, do you want to ask any questions?
We have a question by Commissioner Elcar, the state Elcar.
Hi, Nedra. When you talk about these projects, can you tell the public where this project idea came from, like who recommended it, the Plaza Improvement Committee or whoever? That would be nice to know where these projects came from.
Definitely. Okay, so the first project on your list, I won't read the capital project number, I will just describe the project. It's a 8th and 9th Street Improvement Project for bicycle and pedestrian enhancement. So this is the project which been on the city goal for a while, I would say, and it was put on this list because this was one of the recommendations that came from the Plaza Improvement Task Force, and all the recommendations are not been approved by the council yet, but this is one of the projects that city wanted to do, and we wanted to at least budget some money this year to at least begin the project and start planning and a bit of a design on that. So the project will involve a conversion of 8th and 9th Street between I and K to a one-way street. So right now, 8th Street and 9th Street are one-way street, but it stops at I Street going west. So we want to expand that or extend that up to K Street and maybe more beyond that, but not at this point. So we will stop at K, and it will have potentially enhancement for bicycle and pedestrian improvement and some beautification. And as a part of the project, we have not done the detailed analysis, but we do not anticipate losing parking through this process. So that's the first project. Second project is kind of a big project. It's a part of an Isaacson project that you all are aware of. It came to you last year and it was approved through Planning Commission and the Council. So we call this project Sustainable Transportation Improvement Project. And this includes improvements at various locations in the city, includes sidewalk improvement, some bus stop improvements, some improvements on 255, some improvements. Let me read that. Let me find my list here. And the same list you have in attachment A, exhibit 1, describe that whole things. This will have sidewalk improvements within a 1 mile radius of the project. That's Isaacson project at the intersection of 7th and I. There will be some pedestrian signal improvement on Samoa 255. I'm just reading the some bike lane, some striping, crosswalk, some crossing with rapid flashing. And as a part of the project, we also plan to purchase an electrical bus, which will be run in downtown, which will be connecting downtown to HSU and the South G Street. And also a portion of the money will be for charging infrastructure. And there is quite a bit of educational element also involved in the project. So that's the detail of the project for project number 2. I can stop again if you want to ask questions. Anybody has raised any hands so far? Okay.
Dan?
Yeah, does that work for you, David, us doing those little things? Netra?
I can see that too, just so that you know, Dave, I can see that. I thought you were
Okay,
tapping
great.
on my speech, but that's
Great.
good.
The whopping cost of this project really jumps out. And as I recall, there was some state matching funds or something, I thought, when the Isaacson project was percolating before us. Can you talk about that just for a moment? This isn't just straight out of Arcata budget, right?
No, and thank you for asking that question. I think that's, we want to be very clear on that. That whole $2.3 million is through a grant. It's not a city budget fund. I think the reason it's on the list, so because we want to get a consistency on the project. So it's not only for the funds, the whole fund, the whole project, or the project that I described, it's funded through a sustainable transportation in the amount of $2.3 million.
So in other words, none of it's coming out of the city budget.
That's correct.
You're right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, project number 3 is replacement of our fluoride feed system. And the reason this is some of the project made to the list, because I think our criteria is any project, even if it's a maintenance project that exceeds $25,000, we will put on the list on the CIP. That's the reason it's on the CIP list. There's not much to describe on that project. And the next project is installation of additional fluoride analyzer at our Hindenwell location. Number 5 is our part of a wastewater improvement project. Part of this project was already included in the CIP, which was approved last year. However, March 4 improvements did not make to the list, so we just wanted to make sure we include that in this CIP. Number 7 is one of the recommendations that came from Plaza Improvement Task Force, and that is has various elements, but I think mainly the project will involve removal of central planter and associated improvement in that area. Next project is adding an irrigation well at our ballpark. As you know, the water is getting expensive a bit, so we want to make sure we are self-sustained to irrigate our ball field. So this is part of that project. We'll be installing an irrigation well at the ballpark. And next one is our government building relocation of a natural resource division from Corporation Yard. Right now we have a natural resource division in the Corporation Yard, but as a part of our wastewater improvement project, there will be a lot of movement in that area. So just before we begin the project, we wanted to make sure we are able to move in our division to some other location. Currently, the anticipated location is next to the health sport, where we already have an office for our parks facility, but it's not fully finalized yet in that aspect. But that is a plan at this point when we are moving forward with the project. Next one is to install emergency backup generators at various city facilities. And this came about because of the PSPS that we had recently this summer. We lost power, and we had a lot of buildings, or the city buildings, we had no power. So we are planning to, we will not be able to fund the full project, but we will be relying mainly on grants on this one. We will be starting with our transit facility right now on the 9th Street, which does not have a backup power. So during power outages, we are not able to function fully. So we want to make sure we're able to do that. So that's the reason we'll be doing that as a first project. And there are other locations that we'll be doing emergency generator installation.
Sorry to interrupt, Netra. Commissioner Mayer, you had a question?
Yeah, the first question was actually going to be which locations we're going to be getting the backup generators. But I'm noticing if this is grant funded, is that $250,000 for one location, or what you hope to find for multiple locations? And approximately what are the costs per location?
Okay, I do have a detailed cost, not in front of me, but this $250,000 is for 5 different locations. And most of them will be grant funded. Only one, maybe if it's really emergency, then it will be funded through city, and we are working on that exact number. The reason I said transit building, because it's already in the, it will be approved because we have money for that moving forward.
Thank
Also,
you.
just as a, excuse me. Also, just as a side note for the commission's consideration, in particular with the new commissioners, the CIP review for general plan conformance is solely to determine whether or not the projects that are being proposed are in conformance with the general plan. We don't have a budgetary function in this decision. I don't want to squelch any discussion and understanding about how those funds are being made. Staff is more than happy to share that information with you, but just to distinguish the discussions around how projects are being funded from whether or not they're consistent with the general plan.
Thank you, David. And last project is our installation of a bus stop. This is one of the bus stop is as a part of an open door project. As you know, open door project will be going at the intersection of Foster and Sunset. And as a part of the project, they have, that's one of the conditions for them to install the bus stop. And also we will be doing some bus stop improvement on the G Street. So we wanted to list this project also on the CIP. So these are the list of projects that we have for this year, and not all of the projects will be completed this year. So we'll be, in next 2 or 3, or maybe some project might take 4 years, especially that sustainable transportation improvement project that will last for at least for 4 years. I think that's our grant timeline, so it will last for 4 years. So if you have any further questions, I'm here to answer, please.
And I will remind commissioners the emoji symbols that you can raise or clap hands or raise a thumb are different than raising your hand to be noticed for speaking. And the emoji hands are actually viewable by the public. So we had discussed not using those in this meeting format. Similarly, the chat function should not be used during our meetings. So just a quick reminder on protocol for those. I know Commissioner Figueroa had a question, and then I see some others lining up. So we'll start with you, Commissioner Figueroa. You had some questions?
Yeah, the first question I have, just only one question actually. It's related to it's project 64-0021, and the listed estimated project cost is at $13K. Why is this project included in the CIP as a new project if the cost is estimated to be less than $25K?
That is a very good question. Is Mark, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Is that the estimate has changed? I believe, I think that number is the initial one, but I think that should be maybe 23, but I'm just estimating.
It's more like 14 or 15,000. Once the well comes back online, it needs to be in place. So really, we could have combined the 2 fluoride units together into one, but it is lower than the typical threshold. Although we do have some capital improvement projects that are less than the cost threshold, just to make sure they get scrutinized for the consistency for the general plan. That's the primary purpose of our list. We would not want a project that's a low cost to be approved if it's not consistent with the general plan. So it's,
Yeah.
we'd rather err on the side of consistency and full vetting, full review.
Yeah, it seems like everything other than, I don't know what the annual allocation means for estimated total cost, but we only have one project in the summary of schedule for one that is less than 25K here. So it's just a general question. I was just wondering, and maybe maybe needs to be lumped up with the other fluoride feed system project, since they're
It's a good,
compatible with one another.
it's a good question, and I think on the other master list there are some projects that are lower cost in that same realm as well. So.
Okay.
And Commissioner Davies?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question regarding the city's sustainable transportation infrastructure goals and whether or not or how the city was thinking about serving the general West End Road business community. It feels like there's maybe some low-lying fruit with bike lanes and the possibility of some already owned city lots in that area that could be used for commuter parking to ease some of the traffic and encourage walking and biking to that part of the city.
Thank you for that. Yes, city does have long-term plan to improve the bike and pedestrian facilities in that area. As you know, we are working on Annie and Mary Trail project along the railroad corridor, which will be going from Sunset to all the way along the west end, along the track to the Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District Park 1. And for that project, we are applying for ATP funding. And potentially we'll get the funding this year, and we'll start the, I would say, final design, because 2 years ago we started the planning process for the project, and we have done, I would say, at least 30% designs are done, and our documents required for environmental studies are almost complete. So that will help us to move forward faster. That being said, also on your second point on using city facilities for parking for short-term parking, we did explore that option, and we are still exploring options. We had some applicants who were interested on that, but it was not financially feasible at that time, but we are constantly working on that, trying to make that work.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll take it in turns then. Commissioner White, do you have any comments or questions?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Barstow?
None for me.
Vice Chair Mayor?
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. And also I'd like to point out that on some versions of our Zoom program, we don't actually have that raised hand symbol. And so we're using other things. I'm wondering if a couple of things. One is on the master list. It does appear that there are a number of projects that have been on previous master lists looking forward that have fallen off this one without having actually been built. And I'm realizing that that's not really the focus of what you're explaining today. You want to get the new projects on, but I am wondering about what some of those older projects that had been found to be consistent have been up to in the meantime. One example is the boat launch that would have accommodated motorized boats down at the marsh, for example, that was on in the past and appears to have disappeared. And I think there might be some others. Is there any way of tracking that larger master list, figure out what's gone on with some of those projects?
Mark, can you address that, please?
Sure. I mean, all of these projects must be approved in the annual budget process by the city council. Some are grant dependent. Others come from different funding sources. And within the 5-year window of the CIP, they may or may not get constructed. The boat launch, it's non-motorized, by the way, it's not motorized. That's fully grant funded. And that one, it's made it through the environmental permitting phases design, so it will be constructed. within the next 2 years. That's from a state grant. But yeah, we do an update to the city council on the status of our various projects. Some on the list may never get built, within a 5-year period. It may be longer, but at least they're identified and have been, analyzed to be consistent with the general plan and other policies of the city. But it helps us in seeking funding support sometimes to have them identified as approved projects on this list. So they're not shovel ready necessarily, but at least they're identified and listed as capital needs of the city.
And I would offer that if there are a few projects that you wanted to go through right now, we could certainly do that. And if instead you'd like to see the status update on all of the projects, we could certainly bring back at a later date a matrix that shows current status of each of those different projects. Nature, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just heard, maybe I misheard it from the vice chair, that the boat launch project was not on the list, but it is on the list, the prior list, still there. Its number is 67-0041 in attachment B, and maybe it's not called boat launch, it's called I Street Boat Dock Improvements.
Thank you for that. Chair Tagney, did you have any questions?
Sorry, no, I have no questions about this. They all look to be good projects that fit the general plan from my perspective.
Okay.
Shall I now just ask for any other, public comment?
Thank you,
David. So if there are no further questions of staff on the staff report, we'll move on to public comment.
And
any other questions? Seeing none. Do we have any public comment that's come through on this item?
There's no public comment on this item.
Okay, so we can close public comment and move on to commission deliberations and/or a motion on this item. Are there any commissioners that have any particular comments or anything else to persuade towards a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve adoption of resolution PC 20-02.
Thank you, Julie. We have a motion. Do we have a second out there?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. David, do you want to do a roll call vote?
Yes, please. Thank you. Vice Chair Mayor?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Figueroa?
Aye.
Commissioner Barstow?
Aye.
Commissioner Davies?
Aye.
Commissioner Vasade Elcock?
Aye.
And Chair Tagney?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Well, that's our only public hearing of the evening. So we're going to move on to business items. Are there any business items from the city?
We do have one business item on the agenda. It's to review the strategic infill redevelopment plan update. Because we have a couple of commissioners that are new and because we haven't discussed this in some time, I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation that sort of takes us back to the beginning, the origins of this discussion. I know we've had several meetings where we've covered different elements of infill planning, and so this is not intended to span all of the information that has been provided previously on the city's infill planning process, but it does provide enough of a background so that the newer planning commissioners and those who have viewed this before but will have an opportunity to refresh their memory can get up to speed and all on the same page on this topic. As I mentioned, I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I will share with you now to aid in visuals for this. Okay, and so my view, just for your edification, of the entire Planning Commission is limited while I've got the screen shared, and so I will be pausing periodically to ensure that Planning Commissioners have an opportunity to jump in, and I think it's more than okay to just jump in if you feel like you need to ask something at a time when I haven't paused for a bit. So please feel free to interrupt.
David, so pardon me, but interrupting at this point means just unmuting and speaking out. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, everybody got that? Okay,
so the overarching planning concept we've been referring to as the Strategic Infill Redevelopment Plan. Just for a real quick refresher on that, that includes several different documents that fall under this umbrella of the Strategic Infill Redevelopment Plan that include some work that we've already completed, such as the housing element, some work that we're actively working on, such as the infill market study, which is intended to inform the long-range planning documents that will come afterwards as to gaps in the market, the likely scenarios for cost and feasibility of infill versus greenfield development and that sort of thing. And then moving forward, we'll be developing some specific plans for certain areas, targeted up zones for others, and adopting general plan amendments throughout the general plan to bring it current and also to have it reflect the next 20-year planning document that it's intended to be. So why are we doing this? I guess is sort of the first question. Here's an aerial image of the city of Arcata. I don't have the boundary on, but it's largely the built out area you see here. The pin is near City Hall, where you see the word Arcata. And to the west, you see the green fields that recently, last year, we adopted our resolution for protecting. And to the east, you see the mountains. And so we're kind of hemmed between farmland to the west and forest land to the east. We have the bay to our southern border and the Mad River to the northern border. And so we are enclosed by natural barriers. Historically, the general plans, not just the current cycle that we're in, but prior general plans have recognized the forest lands and the bottomlands as areas where we don't want to encroach to develop, and instead have really focused and emphasized infill development. At another time, I'll be prepared to walk you through specifically the infill policies in the general plan. But right now, I just really want to focus on where is the development potential within the city of Arcata. Why are we trying to meet that, and how do we go about doing that in a way that reflects both the community desire and the community needs for that additional development? So just as a starting point, we wanted to evaluate different patterns of development. And so the area in the red circle is outside the city limits, but back in the 70s and prior, this area was eyed as a likely annexation area where we would continue to expand residential low-income development, or residential low-density development, excuse me. Here's the downtown area in the circle, the yellow circle. We've discussed and have several policies that concentrate development in the downtown, but we're relatively built out there. And then another area that we've looked at is near the downtown along the K Street corridor, what's now being referred to as the Arcata Gateway, one of many, I'm told. that has a lot of industrial uses that many of which have shifted with the times, have pivoted, started new uses that still reflect industrial uses, some of which have fallen into relative disrepair and are no longer in large scale use. So looking at these different areas, we can see that in the downtown area, we have about 10 acres of vacant land. At the densities in the current general plan, that would yield 320 units. And we verified this density by taking the Plaza Point project, which is here on across the street from the co-op, relatively new high density development, 3 stories, approximately 30 units. And I took that and I multiplied it across all the vacant sites that I could readily see. Some of them scaled down, as you'll see here. And I totaled 224 units with that exercise. And so of the total 320, I could readily find 240 units with very modest sized buildings relative to our current development patterns. In the green area, we have approximately 90 acres of available land. Currently, most of that is zoned industrial, and so it doesn't really allow for full build out at these densities. But if we did change the zoning so that you could build out, we would have approximately 2,900 units. Now, just for some perspective, in the past several decades, say the last 30 years, we've produced about 1,000 units per decade in the city of Arcata. So 1,000 housing units, new housing units per decade in the city of Arcata. In recent times, that has slowed down, and we've had a couple of recessions that we've gone through in the last decade. But we are still on track to produce upwards of 80 units per year, so 800 units per decade. So still in the same ballpark. So at 2,900 units, if you just took that rough estimate, that'd be close to 30 years worth of development. We verified this in the same way. The area that is in the red circle that could be used to annex and build out residential low density development could produce 2,600 units. That's over 358 acres. So just in contrast, 90 acres producing 2,900 versus 358 acres producing 2,600. And that's really just a function of the higher density that would be allowed for in the downtown. When we've had this discussion with the public before, some people have said, well, why don't you just make that higher density out on the bottomlands, which is an alternative and certainly one that the city could evaluate. Producing higher density, which would be approximately 4 times that amount, and annexing into the bottomlands when we have available area that we could do the same thing within and around the downtown, where we already have built out infrastructure. Comparing those two things is really a policy decision, and current policy guidance would drive us towards development in the downtown. But I did want to give you a sense, and the community a sense, of what greenfield development would look like. So part of what drove us to thinking about this new planning scenario that I'm going to describe to you tonight was based on our experience over the last 10, 15 years working with developments, bringing in through the planning system, having the frustration of decision makers now being saddled with decisions that had been made decades ago, and trying to assess and determine whether or not those policies were still relevant or how they applied in this particular situation. And to a certain extent, this tension that is involved in developing, new uses, new buildings, new infrastructure, excuse me, within any city really needs to have some sort of tension to make sure that you don't have just runaway development. But the way I'd characterize this is that, at this point, the policy, market, expertise to produce these developments, the financing mechanisms, the programs that are available, they all really are creating a lot of tension for development that winds up frustrating everyone's efforts. Everyone from the community member who's not happy with a proposed project to a developer who's trying to bring, housing to the community, which we know we desperately need, or new industrial or commercial uses. And so the way that we've been talking for the past couple of years about resolving this tension is through alignment. So we've talked a lot about infill development. The image in the center of the screen is intended to reflect, what infill development could look like. To some extent, you might have infill of existing neighborhoods. Or you might have, as we're proposing in the K Street corridor, some uses that are completely demolished to provide for these new uses. But we need to align the policy to start with. Currently, our policy is that we have these land use categories represented by different colored boxes that reflect these parcels. Some uses are allowed on certain parcels and not allowed on other parcels. And there's a discretionary decision that has to be made for most uses on any of these given parcels. A lot of the tension that's developed over the last decade or so is that uses no longer fit cleanly in the boxes that we designed for them. And so we created a land use designation and a series of definitions around a certain land use. And what we're finding is that retailers, in order to compete with Amazon and eBay, have had to get very creative with what they are offering in terms of their services and goods. And the retail that we have today oftentimes doesn't look like the retail we had 20 years ago when these concepts were being developed. And so aligning zoning, aligning infrastructure, aligning state and local policy on climate change, all of these policy alignments are critical to support development. There have been times in the past when development has been viewed by some in the community as bad, as antithetical to the desires that this community has at large, opposite to the outdoors, the bay, the trails, and all of these things that we all reflect and respect. But the fact of the matter is that everything that we do happens within development. All of the homes that we live in, all of the structures that we work in are all development, and that's all we're talking about supporting is continued use and expansion of those uses where it makes sense. So aligning development policy with the financial mechanisms and making them feasible. We have to ensure that the financial institutions come along and that the development constraints that we establish support and make those developments feasible. If they're not profitable, if people aren't, the developers aren't making money on these projects, they're clearly not going to do them. Aligning the support for development in terms of the expertise, the markets that, whether there are gaps in those markets and being able to identify and target those, identifying the workforce, all of these things are critical to bringing around a fully aligned development potential within your community and resolving some of that tension, perhaps not all of it, but to the extent feasible, resolving that tension so that development has a clear path forward as to what the community needs and what the pathways are for obtaining that. Really what we're talking about here is aligning the policy, making sure that as you reviewed the CIP earlier tonight, that the infrastructure that we're developing is planning for the future that we want to see in Arcata, that the zoning aligns and that we can work with our state partners. So that all sounds well and good. Alignment is good. Everyone would agree is that the more aligned all of those different policy and financial institutions, the will of the developer, the will of the community, the more aligned those things are, the better. So that leads me to sort of the next step in how do we actually implement that alignment? And that's what we've been working on for the past year, is developing the implementation tools to create that alignment. Oftentimes we'll have someone come in when we're evaluating our codes against the project that they want to do. We'll find that they have a perfectly reasonable project proposal for the particular parcel that they have, but it doesn't comport with the codes. And so we're left telling people, I'm sorry, you can't do what you want to do, even though it makes complete sense for your property, because it doesn't align with our codes. Well, there's a lot of frustration associated with that. And so when a developer comes forward, whether it's a mom and pop trying to put an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard, or a big developer who's putting up a 3-story building in our downtown, they are interested in how much money this project is going to cost them. And so we developed this simple thesis around development called the development triangle. All developments rely on the intersection between the amount of time it takes to get to approval and being able to build your project, the amount of money that's going to cost you, and the amount of uncertainty. And all of these things are related. The more uncertainty, the more planning commission hearings you have to go to, the longer it takes, the more it costs. Similarly, even if we're not going to planning commission meetings, if we're just waiting, there are holding costs. And so the longer it takes, the higher that value is. And the basic thesis is that if you could reduce the time and uncertainty associated with these planning decisions, when the mom and pop are sitting around the kitchen table trying to determine, do we spend our hard-earned money on this accessory dwelling unit? Are we going to make that money back in a reasonable amount of time? They would be willing to pay a little bit extra for our process if they had an absolute dead certain proposal that when they come to the city, there's no resistance. They can go directly to the building department and start building their ADU. Saves them time on financing, saves them time on construction costs, saves them money overall in the development, and it increases their return on the investment, making this decision to invest in housing in our community a logical one for them. To the extent that we impose more regulation, you're going to have more cost, more time, and more uncertainty. And we've seen this happen over the course of the last several decades as we've increased the efficiency and streamlining associated with the planning process. We'll have a state regulation come in and add additional regulation that either completely subverts or sidetracks some of the streamlining we've done. And so what we've said as a community, what we've said at the Planning Commission and what staff has been working on is that more regulation is not the answer. So to that end, the plan has been to, at least in the specific plan area around the K Street corridor, where we want to see rapid investment in rehabilitating and revitalizing those properties, where we have a lot of underutilized properties, where there's a lot of potential to go through some of the planning work ahead of time for developers. Get them so that they have a principally permitted pathway, a pathway where they can walk up to the building counter and say, here's my plans, they comport with your plan, approve my permit, please. So how do we do this, I guess, is the question. One of the reasons why some people view development in the city of Arcata as such a challenging endeavor, going through all of our committee meetings, going through all the staff members who have certain things that they're looking out for, going through a planning commission and then a city council, each of whom is very engaged and has lots of other engaged Arcata residents that are involved in this process. And that adds time and money and expense as we heap on additional planning requirements. The developer wanted to come in and provide 20 units of housing for the community. And at the end of the day, because of the planning process, they're also providing new sidewalks, new streets, new infrastructure, and some funds for offsite parks, for example. Well, we know this pattern. We know this process. We've been through it many times ourselves. We're the ones that are running independent developers through this process. And so we reasoned that we know what the policy areas are that are most important to us, and we know the implementation measures to achieve those policy areas, what those specific tasks are that we want to see in our developments. So instead of putting each project through its own individual planning process and having them hear once again that we want to have solar PV on the roof and new bike lanes and a public space amenity, instead we'll tell them up front, these are the things that we want to see in our projects. This policy area grid is really just a conceptual model for how we would run this. And as we go through the next 6 to 8 months of planning, I hope to have this more resolved for you. But imagine if a developer walked into the city of Arcata and with their plan set said, hey, look, I evaluated your policy grid. Under energy, you said you wanted to see passive solar. You said you wanted to see a net zero LEED Gold Plus building. That's what I'm providing you under that. For alternative transportation, I've selected parking share and bus pass program for all of the residents. They'll all have bus passes, and I will fund that indefinitely. Under the building, you wanted to see recycled material with gray water reuse system, and so I've selected that into my project. You've told me in advance that these are the policy areas and these are the implementation measures. I baked those into my project ahead of time. You've already gone through the planning process to allow for this. Give me a building permit, please, and we'll evaluate them for a building permit. So that's in concept how this is intended to work. Now, okay, so I've just described for you what's in it for the developer. The developer gets a very streamlined process, one where we've identified all of the desires of the city, of the community, of the resource agencies, of all of our different programs, and we've identified them up front. We've made the process very transparent for the developer, and so we've certainly done them a favor. I've already made the point, and I think we would all recognize that the developer is not opposed to or in opposition to the city's interest. In fact, the developer is a partner with the city, providing those housing units and commercial spaces, industrial spaces that we need to be a thriving city. So that's one thing the community gets, but really that's just the first thing that the community gets. This policy alignment doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so, for example, we've been talking about the Arcata Gateway specific plan area shown here in blue. We've talked about doing some targeted upzoning in the downtown, the area in orange there. I've already indicated to you that we have 30 years worth of development potential in these two areas at historic trends. And really the question is, our existing long-range planning documents point in the direction of doing this plan, but what does the community now want to see? The community now is very engaged and thoughtful about planning in Arcata, and the majority of people will say, at least in concept, that they are all for infill development. We have seen infill projects come forward, and it's a little bit harder to swallow those projects when they're happening in your backyard, as we've seen. But in general, people are for infill development. And so we've been engaging folks over the past year through both our housing element update, our local coastal program update, and the housing or the market study that we've been doing. And what we've been asking the community is, do these desired outcomes for infill development in and around the downtown make sense to you? Mixed use. So we want to have some commercial, some residential. Mixed income. We want people of different income levels to be able to live within the same buildings, within the same neighborhoods, within the same communities, without having to know that the person walking out the front door is a low income or a high income individual. Multi-generational, there's for decades been a push to get more housing that is amenable to seniors. And in recent times, there's been a real push to identify that senior exclusive housing sometimes isn't the best for the mental health of those seniors, and the younger generation also benefits greatly from living in a multi-generational neighborhood. We've had a real strong focus on alternative transportation. The biggest project on the CIP list that you looked at earlier today is helping the city to build out its alternative transportation. That was born on the back of grants that were obtained through the Isaacson Affordable Housing Project. And it's this mixture of cap and trade money that's coming from the state that will continue to funnel into the city of Arcata if we do right to provide alternative transportation projects and affordable housing projects. We want to make sure that there's opportunities for ownership and rental. Not everyone's ready to buy a house. Not everyone's going to be interested in buying one of these flats, a condo in a mixed use building, but we want to make sure that those alternatives are available to people. Right now, we know that our single family housing stock is largely taken up by rentals. Most of those are out of the area owners of those rental properties who manage from afar for basically rental housing for students. And so could we shift the dynamic by adding more housing stock and more opportunities of both ownership and rental? And ultimately, we're looking at having more of a form-based code that would implement this vision, that would pair with the matrix, the policy matrix that I described earlier, that would allow the investor the ability to make the decision about the uses that happen within those buildings, as long as they provided the amenities and the street facing pedestrian-oriented development that the city is interested in obtaining. This incentivizes development by providing advance notice on what the community has stated as its desire to developers, so that they know that they've reduced their time and uncertainty and may have increased slightly their investment as they pay for us to go through this planning process when they come in, but that they've got certainty around their project. So we floated these desired outcomes over the past year by the community. In September of last year, we held a culminating meeting. It was fairly well attended. We had approximately 50 people come to that workshop. We made contact with over 500 people through the course of last year in various different outreaches and meetings and surveys. We had meetings in a box where we went to the farmer's market. We went to the ball field in McKinleyville when soccer was happening. We went to the Eureka Friday night markets. We went to all kinds of different places to meet all different kinds of people to make sure that our outreach was not just targeting those who are fortunate enough to be able to come to a planning commission meeting at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night. We spoke with students, we spoke with seniors, we spoke with folks from all different range of backgrounds and income levels. And we floated these ideas by them. This is obviously a lot to take in for community members, and we don't think that we're done with our outreach, but I wanted to report back on some of the information that's come forward since then. This was one of the stations that we had at that housing meeting. By the way, we did one of these in English and one of these in Spanish. We had interpreters who would translate simultaneously into Spanish. Many of the folks that came to the Spanish meeting were bilingual, but felt more comfortable in Spanish. And so many different folks weighed in on these, and this is a compilation of those outreaches. With respect to accessory dwelling units, which is a fairly simple way to do infill development, you can double the number of units on a parcel without really drastically changing the face of that neighborhood. This was some of the feedback we got. These feedbacks were from folks that had considered establishing an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. I want you to notice the two biggest concerns. Planning and building regulations are too confusing. Our process is too convoluted. And don't have the cash to do it. I'm not sure I could get the financing. So cost is the highest priority for these folks, to the extent that we can reduce the confusing building regulations and give them a direct pathway to go, the more accessory dwelling units we can build, the more we'll support our community doing that. We also asked the community what they thought about different types of developments. We had given them all of the background that we gave you tonight and more. We talked about everything from on the very top, the most infill centric views of higher density and development in existing residential zones, or encouraging more development in the downtown, all the way down to annexing land outside the city limits. And so you can see reflected in this compilation of those various housing meeting outreaches that we did, that folks really are in support of more accessory dwelling units. So building in density that doesn't affect the look and feel of our existing neighborhoods, and densifying the downtown, making sure that we go big. Last year we were using the catch line, go big and go home, to sort of reflect this idea that you could have higher density developments in the downtown, and and really bring that home in a way that Arcata could embrace. And you'll see that, yes, please.
This is a technical question. I don't know if something about Zoom has timed out, but I'm not seeing the graphics on my screen anymore. And I don't know if other commissioners have that same challenge.
Can you see them? Can you see them now?
No, I all I see is the word Zoom on my screen.
Okay, sorry for the technical challenge. Can anyone see the screen that I'm sharing?
I can.
Yeah.
I can see the screen you're sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I can't. It went, there it is.
Okay. Dan, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what is.
If I mean, all right, start my video. I just got a link from you, start my video.
Does that help? Can you see our screens now?
I see all of you, but I don't see your screens, and I don't know why. I haven't touched anything. This just changed while you were talking.
Okay, I'm gonna stop my share and start it over again to try and hopefully reset yours. Can you see it now?
Nope, just the word Zoom.
Okay, I apologize, Dan. I'll have to provide you the slides afterwards.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't all of us, really. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so kind of wrapping up here, basically what we gathered over the past year really strongly supports the direction that we're going in. We have not stopped our outreach and engagement. We plan to ramp up again. One of the things that we've been thinking about recently is, what does public engagement look like in the COVID era? And so we'll be developing some tools and outreach for continuing to gather this, in particular if the shelter-in-place order continues longer term. Some of the other feedback that came out of the September 23rd, 2019 meeting was around what are the amenities, what are the specific types of policy areas, and what specifically do we want to see from these new developments. And these were sourced directly from the community. These were ideas that came from community members speaking with one another at this engagement. And you can see a lot of the same types of measures that we've been kicking around in concept are being reflected in the discussions that the community is having. So I feel like we're on the right track. We're going to continue to vet this, and as we develop the plans in more detail, we'll be able to pull these into sharper relief. But we really did hit a lot of the same kinds of topic areas, policy areas, in our initial discussions before we went out to vet this with the public that the public is interested in. So it's encouraging to see that. This timeline is still relatively on track. The middle is being squeezed. We're still trying to finish by 2021. And so, we've worked on certain areas of this. So bullet number 1, hiring the consultant and beginning the stakeholder engagement. We've completed some of that. We're in stakeholder engagement now. Housing market analysis is nearly complete. If not for COVID, we would have been done with our review and reviewing it. So I anticipate that'll be being circulated to committees and commission and the city council within the next month or so. We are looking at the admin draft market analysis, and we'll be bringing to the Planning Commission, as I said, over the course of the next month. Bullet number 4, begin working on the EIR for the general plan updates. We're initiating the RFPs for this work, but have not begun it yet, so we're a little behind on that aspect. Obviously, bullet number 5, finalize the housing market analysis, is going to be pushed into mid-2020. Identifying the infill incentive programs, we're working through those now. Karin Roscoe, our community development specialist, who's been focused primarily on this work, has been working hard to develop that policy matrix. And I envision being able to bring that along with the market analysis to the Planning Commission soon. And then we really will be wrapping up stakeholder engagement, incorporating all of that into the specific plan around the Arcata Gateway corridor and some of these targeted up zones that we'll be looking at here in late 2020. We're combining this work with the local coastal program update, and some of the funding that we have for that project will be brought to bear since the gateway overlaps with the coastal zone to an extent. And we're still targeting 2021 as our end date for completing and implementing these new policies and programs. So that's sort of a whirlwind on infill development. I want to make sure that there's opportunity for questions and discussion amongst the Planning Commission. Looks like Commissioner Besaid-Elcock has a comment or a question.
Hi, David. Yeah, I had a question about the 3rd unit by right that came down from the governor's office this year. DELA was going to try to simplify that law and make it readable. How's she doing on that? I'm very curious as to how we're going to be able to use that here in Arcata.
Yes, yeah, thank you for that. We have currently, as you mentioned, by state law, under certain circumstances, the requirement that we permit 3rd units by right now. Now, the way that happens is they're not 3 full units. One of them has to be what the state refers to as a junior ADU. And so we were proposing to develop some local regulation that would allow for 3 full units in certain areas, or perhaps all throughout the city. She has been working on that. Obviously, we've been sidetracked for the past several weeks, and she hasn't put much effort into that recently, but she has completed her analysis and provided that for my review of the state regulation. And we have a flow chart and some supporting materials to help people walk through that new state law that we'll be able to operationalize here in the next month. And then I anticipate when we come back around with the market study and the other next steps, the policy grid, we'll be able to give you more information at that time also on having a 3rd unit by right regulation here in the city. I'll go ahead and take it in turns to see if there's any additional comment. I don't see any hands raised. Vice Chair Mayor?
I think your summary was really helpful, and it's really nice to see what progress you're making in terms of thinking about how to incorporate public input. Public input can be a little bit tricky on some of these issues because things that sound great in general suddenly often appear not so great if they involve new buildings towering over one's bedroom window and such things. And so I am wondering about whether some of those trickier aspects of high density infill are also going to be very explicitly addressed in strategic infill plan that is going to come to us in draft form at some point.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I do think that the discussion earlier on folks being for infill development in concept and then opposed when it's happening in their backyard, a little bit glib way of saying that, yeah, those details do matter. Part of the next phase of our public outreach on a specific plan will involve a series of charrettes with the community so that they can at least be able to visualize, if in just drawings or models, what the community might look like if we were to allow 4 or 5 story buildings. Obviously, the development patterns in the city of Arcata are going to be really different than the development patterns in the city of San Francisco, for example, just due to the the size of the rights of way and that sort of thing.
Are those charrettes going to be very site specific? The reason I'm asking is that the charrette format really is very location specific. We can ask questions about a 4 story building in general, but a 4 story building in a specific location is a very different critter.
That's correct. And we don't have it planned out yet, but in my dream planning world, we would actually have models that we could move around on a large scale map of that specific area with existing buildings modeled in there as well, so that you really get a sense for what does the change look like, what does the change feel like. At the end of the day, the state, as I presented to the Planning Commission previously, is really pushing hard on jurisdictions to ensure that they are allowing development that approaches their regional housing needs allocation goals, and that if jurisdictions are not promoting development or not permitting development, are using site standards or other public processes to prevent those types of development from being built in their community, the state's basically handing over land use decisions to the developers. And there are real strict metrics for how the state is identifying whether or not the city is doing that or not. They're not coming in and evaluating decisions at the Planning Commission level. They're just determining, have you built the number of lower income housing units in your regional housing needs allocation that you should have at this proportional point in the cycle, and if you haven't, they're authorizing developers to come in and build that for you without your land use discretionary approval.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons that I'm very intent on the site specific location by location approach is simply because so much of that higher density development that you're really trying to direct toward the downtown would involve a great deal of fundamental rezoning. When you rezone land from industrial to residential or mixed use, that's something that the city does have full discretion over. And so in order to make those sorts of changes happen in a way that will keep our discretion within the city rather than relinquishing it to the state, I really believe that being able to envision that change on a site-by-site basis in a place as small as Arcata, compared to the Los Angeles's that the state policies are designed to address is pretty important. And I would recommend either doing that site-by-site work or holding off on a general set of design oriented codes until we can do that.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do our best at the staff level to, hit that gold standard of public engagement. Commissioner White, did you have a comment, question?
I guess I'm wondering, and I apologize if you've already addressed this, but with regards to the timelines and meeting our housing element criteria, we have 4 years, is that correct? Or is it going to be 8?
It's an 8-year cycle.
Okay, so is there a timeline where they come in like midway or every 2 years and we have certain numbers that we have to meet? How does that work out?
That's correct. They use each quarter of the period. So every 2 years, they'll be evaluating how many units that we've produced, and they'll base that evaluation on our annual housing report.
So could I just clarify? So like the overall number, I believe off my head was 640?
I believe it was 610, but yeah,
Okay.
in that ballpark.
So will they give us a specific number that we have to meet at each quarter, or is it more just coming in and looking at how our progress is?
Yeah, it's a quarter per quarter. So if we have 100 units in the first 2 years, we should have produced 25. In the first half, 4 years, we should have produced 50, so on and so forth.
And could I ask another question with regards to, I love the matrix and I feel like it really addresses some of the concerns that the public had, of it's not as difficult to understand. It really outlines kind of a plug and chug process, and it also addresses the financial because you can go through the process, which saves money. Does that mean then it won't come through the Planning Commission? I'm still kind of trying to understand that.
Yeah, that's correct. The idea here is to at least in the specific plan zone, to provide a framework that allows principally permitted development. And so as long as the development comports with that form-based code, provides the measures that are in the policy matrix, and they've paid their fee to pay us back for the work that we've done, the planning work that we've done, bringing the community together to do the charrettes and so on and so forth, then they go directly to a building permit. They never go through a planning process. Part of the challenge is that with these planning documents, if they're established, if they're determined that you can do development within a certain development envelope, the very site-specific nature of those decisions, as Commissioner Mayer was describing earlier, is oftentimes so subject to differences of opinion as to whether or not they're meeting them. Ultimately, when a project comes forward, what we've seen in practice is that projects that do meet the code have experienced significant resistance, while others sail right through. And so this is providing this is not relative to anything that is new. Arcata has developed a reputation amongst developers. Some developers have sworn off developing in Arcata because of our process. And I guess on the one hand we could say, well, hey, that's okay if those developers don't want to go through our process and be subject to review and provide what the community wants, then we don't want them to build here anyway. But I think what really the way to look at that is that if we could level the playing field and encourage development, the kind of development that we want to see in our community, that we vetted with the community in advance, if we can provide a clear pathway for folks that once they understand what the community wants, they can come and build it, as opposed to having to run the planning gauntlet with our 11 committees and various decision makers for every time that they're bringing forward a project, then we're going to still have those good outcomes that we want because we're doing that more site-specific review, but we're going to have it in a process that incentivizes as opposed to discourages development. So the community is really getting a chance on the front end to do a lot of planning work and discuss what it wants, on a very site-specific level. One of the dreams I have, for example, and this may be completely unfeasible. I'm willing to acknowledge that right from the start. But one of the dreams that I have for this process would be that the creek that currently flows underneath the car wash could be daylighted, that we could convince that landowner to daylight that creek and retain the development potential. They get no penalty for daylighting the creek. They, in fact, maybe even get an incentive for daylighting the creek, so they get higher development potential. Because otherwise, that piece of property has zero incentive for ever changing. Right now, it's a very low expense business that has a very high return. And I have nothing against storage units or car washes. I mean, it's a great place it's better to wash your car at a car wash than it is to do it on your lawn, for sure. But that's just a really underutilized use for that property. And so we're gonna have to do something as a community in order to create enough incentive for that landowner to decide to do something. And so now we're taking the opportunity to consider, can we actually incentivize them not just to develop it, but to really give the community back something to, daylight that creek. I guess I've been sitting for too long. My light's got a timer. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Barstow, do you have any questions or comments?
My only comment is that the timeline and the policies and so on that you've laid out that need developing, the whole package is quite staggering, really. And I hope that you'll be able to use the input and expertise and help of the Planning Commission as this process goes along.
Absolutely. As we get closer to, for the past 2 years, we've been really in concept mode. And I feel like in the next 2 years, we're going to get into meat and potatoes mode. So we're going to be bringing the Planning Commission lots of meat and potatoes. Commissioner Vasade Alcock?
I'm good.
Okay. Commissioner Davies?
I'm good. I appreciate that presentation. I personally found the visual component of the PowerPoint presentation brought a lot of the information together in an effective way, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Commissioner Figueroa?
No comments, particularly. I appreciate the presentation to understand what the community plan is to move forward with Infill. So I've been going to the meetings the last month or two, or pre-COVID, and now it's good to understand specifically what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have nothing else on this business item.
Lost my. Hey, I'm just out. I can hear everything, but I can't see anything and I can't interact and I'm muted. Move on to correspondence. Are there any correspondence from commission or staff?
Do any commissioners have correspondence? Looks like no. Staff has no further correspondence for this evening.
All right. Well, thank you for that report and for this COVID scenario. And we can adjourn.
All right. Thank you, everyone.